On the 7th of December 1886, the Chambre des députés voted to sell the crown jewels of France. The law was numbered, dated and co-signed by President Jules Grévy and Finance Minister Sadi Carnot. It authorized the liquidation of every diamond, pearl, ruby, sapphire and emerald in the national collection not deemed to possess scientific or mineralogical interest. A 5-member expert commission would decide which pieces lived and which died. The proceeds would fund the Caisse d'amortissement, the National Debt Sinking Fund. The bill passed. It was promulgated on the 10th of December and published in the Journal Officiel on the 11th of January 1887. The collection it condemned had been accumulating for 357 years, since François I declared the crown jewels inalienable property of the French state in 1530. It contained 77,486 individual stones and pearls. The commission appraised their total value at 21,267,040 francs. Not one of the families who had worn them, Bourbon, Orléans, Bonapartes, remained on French soil to object. They had already been dealt with. The jewel sale was not an isolated act. It was the final instrument in a coordinated legislative campaign that the Third Republic had been executing for months. And that campaign had a specific trigger. On the 14th of May, 1886, Philippe, Count of Paris, the Orleanist pretender, recognised by most French monarchists as Philippe VII, hosted a reception at the Hôtel Galliera in Paris to celebrate the engagement of his daughter Princess Amélie to Crown Prince Carlos of Portugal. The event drew the diplomatic corps, the old aristocracy, and enormous crowds. Press coverage was extensive. Republican deputies watched what looked, in every particular, like a rehearsal for a restoration. 1885 legislative elections had already alarmed them. Conservative, royalist and Bonapartist deputies had surged from roughly 90 seats to nearly 200. The monarchist cause was not dead. It was holding receptions. The Republic struck on the 22nd of June, 1886. The Loi d'Exile passed the Chamber by 315 votes to 232, and the Senate by 141 to 107. Article 1 declared the territory of the Republic permanently forbidden to the heads of formerly reigning families and their direct heirs in the order of primogeniture. Violators faced 2 to 5 years imprisonment. Article 4 barred all members of former reigning families from military service, public office, and elected positions. The law targeted 3 houses simultaneously: Bourbon-Orléans, Bonaparte, and any surviving legitimist claimant. 5 months later, the jewel sale law followed. The logic was explicit. Deputy Benjamin Raspail, who had first proposed the sale in 1878, had framed it as both philanthropic and political. Diamonds bought with the people's money, he argued, must be used for the benefit of the people. The Chamber had first approved the principle on the 20th of June, 1882, by approximately 342 votes to 85. But the measure stalled in the Senate for 4 years, years during which the monarchist threat grew. The 1885 election results broke the deadlock. The Senate voted on the 26th of October, 1886. The Chamber followed on the 7th of December. Raspail's original proposal had called for proceeds to fund a workers' disability fund. Jules Ferry had countered that the revenue would be only a drop in the ocean, and pushed instead for a museum's endowment. What the Republic actually created was a debt repayment mechanism. The people's diamonds would service the people's bonds. The Republic had exiled the princes. Now it would scatter the stones. The palaces were already burning, or already rubble, or scheduled for demolition. Sans couronne, pas besoin de roi. Without a crown, no need for a king. The collection the law condemned was not assembled by a single monarch or a single century. It was the accumulated physical weight of every French sovereign from the Renaissance forward, and its scale was without parallel in Europe. François I established the principle in 1530. The crown jewels were not the king's personal property. They belonged to the state, held in trust by whichever dynasty occupied the throne, inalienable and indivisible. Every successor added to them, none could subtract. By the time of the Revolution, the collection had survived the wars of religion, the Fronde, the bankruptcy of Louis XIV's final years, and the near dissolution of the monarchy under Louis XVI, and through all of it, the stones remained. The centerpiece was the Regent Diamond, 140.64 carats. D-color, cushion brilliant, type 2A. The purest chemical classification a diamond can hold. Discovered in the Kolar mine in Golconda, India, around 1698. Purchased by Philippe II, Duke of Orléans, Regent of France, in 1717 for £135,000 sterling. A sum so large it required 2 years of negotiation and the involvement of the financier John Law. It was set into Louis XV's coronation crown in 1722. It adorned Louis XV's hat. Napoleon mounted it in the hilt of his ceremonial sword. The Regent alone was worth roughly half the collection's total appraised value. Beside it sat the Côte de Bretagne spinel, 105 carats, carved into the shape of a dragon, the oldest stone in the collection, listed in François I's original 1530 inventory. The Hortensia diamond, approximately 20 carats. Peach pink, named for Hortense de Beauharnais, Napoleon's stepdaughter and Queen of Holland. The 18 Mazarin diamonds, bequeathed to the crown by Cardinal Jules Mazarin upon his death in 1661, each one willed with the specific instruction that they must never leave France. The Ruspoli sapphire, 135.8 carats. A stone so geometrically perfect that curators at the Muséum National d'Histoire Naturelle would later exploit its shape to save it from the auction block. Louis XIV had been the collection's most aggressive builder. His purchase of the Tavernier blue, 115 carats of deep blue diamond, acquired from the gem merchant Jean-Baptiste Tavernier in 1668 for 220,000 livres, became the foundation stone of French gemological supremacy. He had it recut to 67.125 carats and renamed it the French blue. It became the most celebrated coloured diamond. In European history, it would also become the most famous theft victim. Napoleon I rebuilt the collection after the Revolutionary-era losses, commissioning new coronation pieces, new parures for Empress Josephine, and then Empress Marie-Louise. Napoleon III expanded it further. His wife, Empress Eugénie, was the last sovereign to wear the crown jewels at state functions, and under her patronage, the collection reached its physical peak. The jewellers Lemonnier, Bapst and Kramer created new diadems, necklaces, bracelets, brooches, combs and corsage ornaments in quantities that filled vault after vault in the Garde Meuble and later the Pavillon de Flore. By the time the Commission sat down to sort the collection in February of 1887, it comprised 51,403 brilliant cut diamonds, 21,119 rose-cut diamonds, 2,962 pearls, 507 rubies, 136 sapphires, 250 emeralds, hundreds of additional coloured stones, garnets, topazes, turquoises, amethysts, opals. The total stone count of 77,486 made it the largest single collection of royal gemstones in the Western world. 357 years of accumulation, 15 monarchs, 2 emperors, 1 empress consort who wore more of the collection at public events than any other individual in its history. The Commission had been given a few weeks to decide what survived and what went under the hammer. Philippe, Count of Paris, was 48 years old. He had spent his life preparing for a throne the Republic was now systematically dismantling beneath him. When the exile law passed, he departed from the Château d'Eu on the 24th of June, 1886. At the port of Le Tréport, over 12,000 people turned out to see him off. His parting declaration carried the precision of a man who understood exactly what was happening. La République a peur, en me frappant, elle me désigne. The Republic is afraid. By striking me, it designates me. He settled first at Sheen House in Richmond, near where his grandfather Louis-Philippe had lived in exile after 1848. Then he leased the Grand Stowe House in Buckinghamshire. He published his Pact National Manifesto, briefly supported General Boulanger's movement, and made a tour of the United States, where he visited the grave of General McClellan, under whom he had served as a volunteer in the American Civil War, and knelt in the rain. "No, no," he told his companions, "I care nothing for the rain. I have been in showers of both water and bullets, and I fear neither." He never returned to France. He died of stomach cancer at Stowe House on the 8th of September, 1894. He was 56 years old. His remains were not transferred to the Chapelle Royale de Dreux until 58 to 64 years after his death in English exile. His son, Louis-Philippe Robert, Duke of Orléans, was 17 and enrolled at Saint-Cyr when the exile law struck. On the 6th of February 1890, his 21st birthday, he deliberately crossed into Paris and presented himself for military service in violation of the law. He was arrested immediately, confined in the conciergerie, and sentenced to 2 years at Clairvaux prison. He served several months before being released and expelled. The gesture made him a monarchist hero. He became the Orleanist pretender upon his father's death, married Archduchess Maria Dorothea of Austria, and spent the rest of his life in exile, undertaking Arctic expeditions, maintaining a shadow court, growing old in foreign hotels. He died of pneumonia in Palermo, Sicily, on the 28th of March, 1926. He was 57. He never set foot in France again as a free man. Henry, Count of Chambord, had already sealed the monarchy's fate before any of this. Born on the 29th of September, 1820, as the posthumous son of the assassinated Duke of Berry, he was the last direct male descendant of Charles X and the legitimist claimant to the throne. When the monarchist majority National Assembly offered him the crown in the early 1870s, when a restoration was not merely possible but probable, Chambord refused to accept it unless France abandoned the tricolour flag for the white fleur-de-lis of the elder Bourbons. The tricolour, he said, was the flag of the Revolution. He would not reign under it. The offer collapsed. The Republic was established by default. Pope Pius IX reportedly said, "And all that for a napkin." Chambord's stubbornness inadvertently made the Republic permanent. Some Republicans jokingly called him the French George Washington. He died at Frosdorf, Austria, on the 24th of August, 1883, without children. He was 62. The senior Bourbon male line ended with him. The monarchist cause passed entirely to the Orléans, and the Republic, freed of the legitimist threat, turned its full attention to eliminating the Orleanist one. Empress Eugénie was 61 years old and living at Farnborough Hill in Hampshire during the Jewel sale. Napoleon III had died in exile in 1873. Their only son, the Prince Imperial, had been killed in the Zulu War on the 1st of June, 1879, stabbed to death by assegais while on a scouting patrol in Natal. She had fled France in September of 1870 with the help of her American dentist, Dr. Thomas Evans, carrying what personal jewellery she could take. Her crown, 1,354 diamonds, 56 emeralds, had been returned to her around 1875 as settlement of civil list claims, saving it from the 1887 auction. She built St. Michael's Abbey at Farnborough as a mausoleum for her husband and son, maintained a court in exile with Bonaparte portraits and Gobelins tapestries, and lived to be 94. She died at the Tuileries Palace in Madrid on the 11th of July 1920. She had been empress for 2 years and a widow for 47. The Bonaparte pretenders were also expelled. Prince Victor Napoleon departed from the Gare du Nord on the 23rd of June 1886. His father, Prince Napoleon Jérôme, known as Plon Plon, left from the Gare de Lyon the same evening, protesting the amalgamation with the Bourbon-Orléans and insisting that the Bonapartes were defenders and soldiers of the revolution. The distinction mattered to him. It did not matter to the Republic. The auction opened on the 12th of May 1887 in the Salle des États at the Pavillon de Flore. Inside the Tuileries complex itself, whose main palace the Republic had demolished 4 years earlier. The public exhibition had begun on the 20th of April and ran for 3 weeks. Parisians and foreigners queued to see the collection one final time, displayed in glass cases under gaslight. The catalogue was published by the Imprimerie Nationale, with photographic plates by Michel Berthaud and expert descriptions by Émile van der Heim, who had served as one of the 5 appraisers. The auctioneer was Maître Eugène Escribe. His assisting expert was Arthur Bloch. The collection was divided into 69 lots to be sold across 9 sessions, ending the 23rd of May. Each lot was assigned a minimum reserve price. The government expected brisk competition. Approximately 600 people attended the first session. The New York Times noted the crowd was mostly foreigners or petits bourgeois, and that the sale seemed to have excited more interest in America than here. The French press was largely hostile. The collection had been appraised at approximately 8 million francs with a reserve of 6 million. The hammer total reached 6,864,050 francs, with buyers' premiums bringing the gross to approximately 7,207,252 francs. After the state's 293,851 francs in organisational expenses, net proceeds were roughly 6.9 million francs. The Republic had flooded the market with precious stones and depressed its own sale. Daniel Alcouf, Grand Conservateur of the Louvre, later described it as the deplorable sale that vertiginously amputated the national heritage. Before the hammer fell, the Commission had performed a different kind of surgery on the objects themselves. Napoleon III's 1855 crown, created by Gabriel Lemonnier, was broken apart. The mount was melted down. The stones were sold as anonymous loose lots. Entire paras were deliberately dismembered. The ruby and diamond set was separated from its matching necklace. Diadems were sold apart from their bracelets. Corsage ornaments were stripped of their pampilles. Settings of extraordinary craftsmanship, work by Bapst, by Nito, by Lemonnier, were treated as scrap metal, valued only by weight. The most methodical destruction was administrative. Stones were removed from historic mounts before sale and grouped by type and size into anonymous lots. A diamond that had sat in Napoleon's coronation crown became indistinguishable from one purchased by a Restoration-era jeweller for Empress Marie-Louise. The Republic had built an apparatus for severing stones from their histories. It didn't burn the objects. It didn't hide them. It rendered them anonymous. It scattered the atoms. The Commission's decisions about what to preserve were inconsistent, shaped by political imperatives as much as aesthetic judgment. The Regent Diamond was kept. It was worth roughly half the appraised total and too famous to sell without scandal. The Côte de Bretagne spinel was kept, the oldest piece irreplaceable. The Hortensia diamond was kept, The crown of Louis XV from 1722 was kept but stripped of all its real stones and fitted with coloured glass replicas. The reliquary brooch of Empress Eugénie, containing Mazarin diamonds 17 and 18, was preserved through what the jewel historian Germain Bapst later called a fortunate accident. The commission had misidentified the piece and passed over it. The Ruspoli sapphire was saved through an audacious deception. Curators at the Muséum National d'Histoire Naturelle claimed, knowingly and falsely, that its unusual faceted shape was a natural, uncut crystal form, which gave it mineralogical rather than jewel value. The claim was accepted. The sapphire was transferred to the museum along with the Emerald of St. Louis, the grand sapphire of Louis XIV, Marie. Antoinette's diamond pins, more than 800 additional stones and pearls for scientific study, and over 1,000 stones sent to the École des Mines. The scientists had outmaneuvered the politicians. They had saved what they could by lying about what it was. The dominant buyer was Charles Louis Tiffany, who travelled to Paris with his gemologist George Frederick Kuntz. Tiffany and Company purchased 24 of the 69 lots for approximately $480,000, a sum greater than the combined purchases of the next 9 largest buyers. This represented roughly 1/3 of the lots and a disproportionately large share by value. The pieces were packaged in custom red and gold leather boxes embossed with Diamants de la Couronne on the lid, and Tiffany and Company, New York and Paris inside. Tiffany's haul included Empress Eugénie's match natural pearl necklaces, her diamond rivière, ruby and diamond bracelets from the Nito parure, lots from the current leaf diamond parure and diamond corsage ornaments. These were resold to America's Gilded Age elite within months. The diamond rivières went to Mrs. Joseph Pulitzer. Corsage ornaments went to Caroline Schermerhorn Astor, the Mrs. Astor, the woman who decided who mattered in New York society. The ruby and diamond bracelets went to Mr. Bradley Martin, who had them worn at his legendary 1897 ball at the Waldorf Hotel. A ball so extravagant it was denounced from pulpits across New York and hastened the family's departure for England. Many of Tiffany's crown jewel purchases were displayed at the 1889 Paris Exposition Universelle, 2 years after the sale. The French crown jewels returned to Paris as American merchandise. The purchases cemented Tiffany's international reputation and earned Charles Louis Tiffany the title the King of Diamonds. Frederic Boucheron acquired the Grand Mazarin diamond, 19.07 carats, fancy light pink, and 2 other Mazarin stones for 101,000 francs. Cardinal Mazarin had bequeathed all 18 diamonds to Louis XIV in 1661 with the instruction that they must never leave France. 226 years later, the Republic sold them to a jeweller who sold them abroad. The historic crown jewellers Bapst and Son bought back the large ruby and diamond necklace they had themselves remodelled in 1814 and 1825, paying the Republic for their own craftsmanship. Carl Fabergé purchased La Regente, the celebrated pearl, and resold it to Russia's fabulously wealthy Yusupov family. Emile Schlesinger purchased Eugénie's diamond bow brooch for 42,200 francs on behalf of Caroline Astor. The jeweller Jacobi acquired Eugénie's pearl and diamond tiara, and notably did not break it up. London firms Garrod and Levison took significant lots. The stones of French kings went to jewellers in New York, London, Moscow and Geneva. Within a generation they had been recut, remounted and absorbed into other collections. Their French identity was gone. Of all the royal exiles in history, the Bourbons, the Habsburgs, the Romanovs, the Ottomans, which dynasty do you think lost the most after losing power? Not just thrones, but the physical objects that proved they had ever ruled. Tell me in the comments. The Tuileries Palace, the primary royal and imperial residence in Paris, had been set ablaze by communards on the 23rd of May, 1871. The stone shell survived largely intact. Restoration was technically feasible, as proved by the rebuilt Hôtel de Ville, which had burned in the same conflagration, but the Republic chose demolition. Despite protests from the architect Viollet-le-Duc and Baron Haussmann, the Chamber passed the Proust Law on the 21st of March 1882, and the Senate approved it on the 28th of June. Demolition ran from February to September of 1883. The contractor, Achille Picard, won the job for 33,500 francs. Stones were sold as souvenirs. Some were shipped to Corsica to build the Château de la Punta. Balustrades ended up at the Carondelet Palace in Quito, Ecuador. The gap the Tuileries left in the Louvre complex remains visible from any aerial photograph of Paris. It is the shape of a missing palace. The Château de Saint-Cloud had burned on the 13th of October, 1870, under French counterfire during the Siege of Paris. Its ruins stood for 21 years. The government demolished them in 1891, citing reasons of economy, security, and, explicitly, the desire to erase the royalist and imperial past. Only the gardens and the grander cascade survive. The national estate of 460 hectares is now a public park. The Palais Royal, the Orléans family seat, since 1661 was sacked in 1848 and partially burned during the Commune. It was rebuilt and colonised. It now houses the Conseil d'État, the Conseil Constitutionnel, and the Ministry of Culture. The Republic did not destroy it, it occupied it. The courtyard contains Daniel Buren's striped columns, installed in 1986, 100 years after the exile of the family whose home it was. The property confiscations had their own arc. The House of Orléans had been the richest family in France, their fortune built on the vast Orléans apanage and the colossal Penthièvre inheritance brought by Louise-Marie Adélaïde de Bourbon. 2 days before accepting the throne in 1830, Louis-Philippe had executed a donation partage transferring ownership of his personal patrimony to his children, attempting to keep it separate from the crown domain. Napoleon III's confiscation decree of the 22nd of January 1852, issued weeks after his coup d'état, annulled this donation and seized everything: the Château d'Eu, Château d'Amboise, Château de la Ferté-Vidame, vast forests, movable goods. Even Napoleon III's own allies were appalled. André-Marie Dupin, former Procureur General, protested that the advisers did not know the facts and had misconstrued all rules of law and equity. The Third Republic reversed this in November of 1872 when the National Assembly voted 614-0 to abrogate the 1852 decrees. Properties not yet sold were returned, but the 1886 Exile law, while not formally confiscating property, effectively severed the family from direct management of what remained. When the Exile law was finally repealed on the 24th of June 1950, 64 years later, the returning Count of Paris found, as one observer noted, little property left except for a few castles which didn't produce income. The Duc d'Aumale, Henri d'Orléans, Philippe's uncle and one of France's wealthiest men, responded to the 1886 Exile law by announcing his intention to bequeath the Château de Chantilly and its entire art collection to the Institut de France. His reasoning was precise. This was the best way to prevent the dismantling and dispersion that had befallen his father's estates. He had protected Chantilly during Napoleon III's confiscation through a dummy sale to the English bank Coutts, then repurchased it after the Second Empire fell and rebuilt it magnificently between 1875 and 1882. The government lifted his personal exile decree in 1889. The donation went through. He died on the 7th of May 1897 at Zucco, Sicily. He was 75 years old. Today, the Musée Condé at Chantilly holds one of France's finest art collections, preserved not by the Republic but against it. the Regent Diamond, 140 carats, is the piece the Republic kept. It has remained in the Louvre since 1887, the single most valuable object the state chose to preserve. During the Second World War, it was hidden behind a stone panel at the Château de Chambord. Its current estimated value exceeds $60 million. The Republic understood what it possessed, even as it destroyed everything around it. The Hope Diamond is the piece the Revolution stole, and the Republic never recovered. The Tavernier Blue, purchased by Louis XIV for 220,000 livres, recut to 67 carats as the French Blue, was stolen from the Garde Meuble during the chaos of September 1792. It resurfaced in London in 1812 as a 45.52 carat deep blue diamond, its identity confirmed in 2007 through three-dimensional modelling of a lead cast at the Muséum National d'Histoire Naturelle. It passed through the hands of Henry Philip Hope, Lord Francis Hope, Pierre Cartier, and Evelyn Walsh McLean before reaching Harry Winston, who donated it to the Smithsonian Institution on the 10th of November, 1958. He sent it by registered mail. The most famous diamond in the world began as French crown property. France has never recovered it. It sits in Washington behind glass, drawing 6 million visitors a year. The Grand Mazarin is the piece the Republic sold and the market eventually judged. Bequeathed by Cardinal Mazarin to Louis XIV in 1661, with the instruction that it must never leave France, it was sold to Boucheron for 101,000 francs in 1887. Boucheron resold it to Russian royalty. It vanished. On the 14th of November 2017, it resurfaced at Christie's in Geneva. It sold for $40,463,493, roughly 144 times its 1887 price. The market's verdict on what the Republic had discarded. The Sancy diamond, 55 carats, pale yellow shield-shaped, was not part of the 1887 sale. It had been stolen during the Revolutionary-era heist of 1792 and never recovered by the French state. It passed through Spanish, Russian and English hands before reaching William Waldorf Astor in 1906. In 1978, the French government purchased it from the Astor family and returned it to the Galerie d'Apollon, 91 years after the Republic had sold everything else. The cost of recovery exceeded any figure the 1887 sale had produced. Russia sold approximately 569 of its 773 Diamond Fund items under the Bolsheviks, roughly 75%, but retained the great Imperial crown, the Imperial scepter with the 189-carat Orlov diamond, and the Imperial globe. Iran preserved its crown jewels entirely after the 1979 revolution. They serve as collateral backing the national currency, valued at over $20 billion, and remain on display at the central bank in Tehran. Turkey converted the Ottoman treasury into the Topkapi Palace Museum intact in 1924. France alone combined revolutionary-era destruction of medieval coronation regalia. The crown of Charlemagne and crown of St. Louis melted down in 1793, with a deliberate, legislated Republican auction nearly a century later. The double blow made the French case uniquely thorough. Russia's dispersal was larger but haphazard. France's was surgical. The current head of the House of Orléans is Jean d'Orléans, Count of Paris, born the 19th of May 1965. He holds an MBA. He has worked at Lazard and Deloitte. He serves as a reserve colonel in the French army. He has 5 children. His heir apparent is Prince Gaston, born in 2009. The family's remaining significant properties are held through the Fondation Saint-Louis, created in 1974 by his grandfather to preserve the Orléans patrimony. The Château d'Amboise, the Château de Dreux, and the Chapelle Royale de Dreux the family necropolis where Philip, Count of Paris, was finally interred 64 years after his death in English exile. The Château d'Amboise receives over 400,000 visitors a year. It contains the tomb of Leonardo da Vinci. In 2021, Jean filed a lawsuit against the Fondation after the Institut de France announced plans to convert part of the Amboise property into a luxury hotel. The damages sought were €1 million. The descendant of a family that once owned forests covering tens of thousands of hectares was suing a foundation for the right to keep a castle from becoming a resort. On the 19th of October 2025, 4 thieves disguised as construction workers used a freight elevator to reach a second-floor balcony of the Louvre, cut through a window and display cases with disc grinders, and escaped in under 8 minutes with 8 pieces from the Galerie d'Apollon valued at €88 million. They dropped the crown of Empress Eugénie during their escape. It was recovered on the pavement with deformation and 10 missing small diamonds, but all 65 emeralds intact. The remaining 7 pieces, including Eugénie's pearl and diamond tiara, the Orléans sapphire parure, and Empress Marie-Louise's emerald necklace and earrings, have not been recovered. Director Laurence Descartes resigned in February of 2026. The Regent Diamond, the Sancy, the Hortensia, and the Côte de Bretagne Spinel were not targeted by the thieves. The Republic had spent decades buying those pieces back, the ruby and diamond bracelets bequeathed to the Louvre in 1973. Eugénie's bow brooch repurchased at Christie's in 2008 for €6.72 million. The Marie-Louise mosaic parure recovered in 2001. Each piece cost more to recover than the entire 1887 sale had raised. The Galerie d'Apollon, the room Louis XIV built to celebrate the glory of the Sun King. Its ceiling, painted by Charles Lebrun and completed by Eugène Delacroix, held the surviving crown jewels for 138 years after the Republic chose to display what it had not sold. 10 million visitors a year passed through the Louvre. The Republic that declared sans couronne, pas besoin de roi, charged €22 admission to see the crown it kept. The Republic has spent the last century trying to undo what it did in 1887. The Sancy diamond was repurchased from the Astor family in 1978. The ruby and diamond bracelets Tiffany bought were bequeathed to the Louvre in 1973. Eugénie's bow brooch was repurchased at Christie's in 2008 for €6.72 million. The Marie-Louise mosaic parure, sold for 6,200 francs in 1887, was recovered in 2001. Each piece cost more to reclaim than the entire 1887 sale had raised. The Republic bought back at millions what it had sold for thousands. And now the cases in the Galerie d'Apollon are emptier than at any point since May of 1887. The jewels that survived the Republic's auction, survived 2 world wars, survived a century and a half in the most visited museum on Earth, are gone, scattered again not by legislation but by 4 men with disc grinders and 8 minutes. The Louvre has announced restoration of the damaged Eugénie crown. The Galerie d'Apollon will eventually reopen. But the collection the Republic preserved, the fraction it decided was too important to sell, the remnant it spent the 20th century augmenting at extraordinary cost, is smaller now than at any point in its modern history. The Republic that broke apart the French crown could not, in the end, keep the pieces.